Hello, everybody. This is the progress report for this Wednesday in October. Really feeling like fall today, isn't it, folks? And
Just wait.
we are now less than 3 weeks away from
20 days, Bob.
an extremely important midterm election. I guess everybody's aware of that. I hope everybody's not going to be aware, but is going to participate by exercising your duty as a citizen and voting. It's going to be the turnout is going to be absolutely critical in this election. And so we're going to be pushing that. But today we're going to have a talk with a candidate who you're not going to get to vote for in the midterm elections. A candidate who's running in a very unique election.
Indirect election.
An indirect election. The candidate we have with us today will be familiar to a lot of you, probably maybe all of you from prior electoral experience. But he is running to win the favor of 400 state representatives and 24 state senators, because he is running to be our next Secretary of State, and that's Colin Van Oster, and we're very pleased he's joining us tonight, and we're going to get to Colin very promptly. But first of all, my good friend and co-host Mike Farley has a POTUS report.
Yeah, we're going to call it the POTUS report on the progress report.
Okay.
We're going to step back. We're going to go to the, what do they call it, the 30,000 feet level. And the reason for this is last week has just been almost unbelievable. There are so many absolutely horrible and disgusting things that have happened and been said that I found it, from my capabilities, impossible to pull a single thing out that I could talk about briefly. So I want to back it up, and I want to talk about this culture of gross. And that's the only word I can use for it. It's just so horrible the way people are talking about other people. And it's filtered all the way down in our politics, right here to New Hampshire. We see it if we watch the national news, and we see about campaigns in other states, and it's come down here to New Hampshire, where people feel free to say just about anything. And I'm going to focus in on one particular quote from our governor, who called paid family leave a vacation. And that's where where I'm going to jump off, because I'm reminded over the past few days I've been thinking about what I was doing 2 years ago, in 2016. This very week I was on vacation in Jacksonville, Florida, in a hurricane, because my dad was on his deathbed, and I had to go to Jacksonville to be with him as we tried to help him through his illness. And that didn't work out, and in the end he passed away, and I had to spend a lot of time in Jacksonville, and I used up all my vacation, all my sick time, and ended up having to take unpaid time to do it. And I'm very fortunate I was able to do it, but let me tell you what, it was not nothing. It was a big stress. And I know that our excellent candidate for governor, Molly Kelly, is making paid family leave one of the issues that she's pushing in her television campaign ads. And I want to come back now to the being gross. If you call paid family leave and can dismiss all of the many, many reasons, one of which I particularly happen to have felt myself a couple years ago, as just vacation, and minimize all of the pain and suffering that all of those people in New Hampshire are going through, you've lost touch with your humanity. And I think a person who doesn't, we need a human as governor. I actually think the Constitution requires the governor to be a human. And sadly, that one profound quote from our current governor diminished him perhaps below that minimum line. And so we need to vote for Molly Kelly. And thank you for indulging me on this personal point of privilege, but I've been thinking about it, and it really hit home for me this particular week.
Okay, very good. That was not a POTUS report. That was a Gooberner report.
It was tangentially related to the culture that the POTUS has brought us to.
Yes.
I'll admit, I used that as a pretext. I had to get something off my chest.
Okay.
But Bob, I'm here on a TV show. I should be able to do that once in a while. Right. I hold back so frequently.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Bob.
Oh, it was a pleasure. So, folks, of course, we do this show live. There'll be re-airings, as there is every week, but it's a live show, and we do welcome callers. We haven't had a whole lot of calls recently, but I know some people are out there watching, and the number is going to be available, 640-3091.
Can I interject, Bob, and just remind folks, we also live stream on manchestertv.org. So if you're out of town, you can just get it up on your telephone, on your laptop, on your tablet. So
Thank you for mentioning that.
we got to mention that more often, I think.
In any event, it's a real pleasure to have with us this candidate for the Secretary of State of New Hampshire in this very, very unique election. The legislature only elects two state officers, Secretary of State and State Treasurer. Then the houses elect their own officers, of course. But this is the two state officials that are not done through the Governor and Council or through an election on their own, but by the action of the state legislature. I don't know what the history of that is. Maybe Colin does. But this is very unique, not only in that this is the electorate for Colin Van Ostern here is 424 elected citizens in our citizen legislature. It's very unique in that, but it's also extremely unique. And there's been no contest for this position for 38 years, or is it 40 years? I can never remember. I mean, the Secretary of State here is Bill Gardner, and he has been since he was first elected, served at least 38 years. I think that's right. And if he wins this election, he would be in there for 40 years.
And he runs every 2 years.
And he runs every 2 years, just like everybody does, except our U.S. senators. And he has been elected far back as I can remember by acclamation. I will say that the last time, when the term that's now ending, when we assembled to elect our officers, the Treasurer and the Secretary of State, for the first time, when the move was made to approve his reelection by acclamation, there were some scattered boos. Now, that's something that has not happened in my prior experience there, and I don't think it's happened for a long time. And now we've moved to the state where the situation we have a highly credible, highly qualified candidate who is seeking to be the next Secretary of State and appeal to these 424 electors and suggest that a time for change has come. So, if I've got all that right, Colin, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're doing this?
Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Mike. I love New Hampshire, and I love New Hampshire with the love of an adopted son. I moved around a lot when I grew up. Moved here when I was a young man at 22 years old. It was the 18th house I ever lived in when I moved here. And I care really strongly about the state and the future of the state, and I'm raising two young boys who I care a lot about. And one of the things I love about New Hampshire is that I think we do democracy better than almost anyone else on earth. We have high voter turnout. We have town meetings where people come together and make decisions about their community.
And we have a lot of elections.
We have a lot of elections. We have the first in the nation presidential primary, which is not only important to New Hampshire, but more importantly, I believe, is important to American democracy. And the eyes of the world are on New Hampshire, and they will be again in just a couple years here. And I think it's very important that somewhere that does do democracy better than almost anywhere else has a responsibility to be honest about what the challenges are that we're facing and what the parts of it are just propaganda or hype. And the Secretary of State is an office where not only does that office manage our elections, but it also manages another number of important governmental functions that relate to having good government. I used to serve on the State Executive Council, which is a kind of like a board of directors for our state government.
Right.
And I saw up close how we could modernize the office of Secretary of State, help local businesses better, how we could have more accountability and transparency, cut down on some of the errors we've seen recently on things like ballots being sent out to voters with the wrong candidates on them, which happened just last week. There's room to do a better job. And part of having the best democracy in the country is that the job that is in charge of administrating that, the Secretary of State, should be one that we have healthy competition for, too. Mm-hmm. Bill has been in office since just before I was born. 42 years, actually. He was elected in 1976.
Oh, I shortchanged him 42 years.
I'm sure he'll let you know about it. He's a good man who I think took on that public service because he cares about New Hampshire. I don't do this to question his motives or his character. But I do believe strongly the reason we have elections is because when we have differences of policy or opinion, we should be able to bring him forward. He has every right to run. We don't have term limits for that office. But I think legislators also, from what I've heard, and I've talked to hundreds of legislative candidates this summer, I think there are a lot of folks who are eager to have a real competition for that job, and a lot of folks who think that's probably a little bit overdue.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yes. I mean, he's been there an awful long time, and it's just astounding. The Secretary of State. Well, first of all, I think we ought to say just a little bit about you. You came here. You had a career as an executive with Stonyfield, one of our great businesses, environmentally conscious businesses. You mentioned you were in the Executive Council. How many terms did you serve there?
I served 2 terms in the Executive Council, so I was there from 2012 to 2016. I served with Chris Pappas. He and I were elected at the same year and served together for 4 years. And I also served with folks like Chris Sununu and with Ray Burton, who was a fellow counselor when I was there.
Yeah.
And it's a great, it's kind of this sometimes overlooked part of our state government. But you essentially have oversight responsibility over dozens of state agencies, every judge, every commissioner, every agency head, except the Secretary of State. All the other ones are confirmed by the governor and the Executive Council, and all state contracts, almost all state spending. You really can see how the state government works from the inside out.
Yeah. And, of course, 2 years ago, you were the Democratic candidate for governor of New Hampshire, and it was a close election, but you came up on the short end. So
it was.
You've had time to think about what to do next.
Yeah.
Okay. We have a call.
Why don't we take that call?
Hi, Lisa. This is the Progress Report, and you're with us on the air. We'd be glad to have your question or comment.
Hi, thank you for taking my question, and this is for Mr. Van Ostern.
Perfect.
Mr. Van Ostern, I have 2 questions. I'll ask my questions, and I can just listen on air. First off, the New Hampshire State Legislature has heard many election law bills last term, including SB 3, which dealt with voter registration and voting. This bill was passed into law by the governor, as you know.
Yeah.
Given the fact that you are passionate about elections in New Hampshire, is it true that you didn't attend any of the lengthy hearings in either the House or the Senate? And how many election law hearings did you attend?
Are those the 2 questions?
That's one of my questions.
Okay, sorry, I thought that was 2. Keep going.
Did you want to answer that first, and then I'll just move on to the second question?
Sure, I'm happy to. So you were talking first about SB 3, and let me just help explain for voters. SB 3 is one of the new laws that's passed. We've had a number in recent years, which changes the registration forms and changes the information that you need when you register to vote if you have moved recently before an election. I just moved in Concord, for example, within the city, and so I filled out the forms when I voted in the new place. A federal court has actually put most of that law on hold, all the penalties involved, because there are parts of it that appear to be unconstitutional. The hearings that we saw were not just for that bill, but were a bill called HB 1264, which was a different bill which has not yet gone into effect. And it's important that viewers know that some of these laws haven't fully taken into effect yet. So the information that you had when you voted last time, that's the same that you need when you vote this time. I was particularly discouraged, since you mentioned the hearings, about the HB 1264 hearing. So we had the League of Women Voters testified against this bill. Town clerks, particularly from college towns, which tend to be most affected, came and testified against the bill. Dozens of college students testified against the bill. I watched it online. I didn't attend it in person. Two individuals testified in favor: the Secretary of State and the Deputy Secretary of State. Those are the only 2. And I watched, there was a press conference beforehand when the town clerk of Hanover, a woman named Betsy McLean, spoke. And I watched that online, and she explained that not only as town clerk does she have the responsibility for ensuring safe and fair elections, but she also has the responsibility for ensuring that everyone who lives in Hanover has the right to vote. And she's had students who rent from her in her home. She rents out an apartment. And she knows what happens when college students show up and they don't have the right paperwork, that sometimes they leave and they don't come back. She knows that they're counted in the census when we figure out how much of our federal taxes come back to us, or when we figure out how many representatives we have. And she knows that they're American citizens who have a right to vote. So I thought her testimony
They
was
do, and
compelling.
you're absolutely correct, sir. And I thank you for your answer.
Sure.
I was at all of those hearings.
Yeah.
I was at all of those hearings, and if my recollection serves me, that the Secretary of State did not testify in favor of that bill, but testified to the constitutionality of that bill. There's a difference between being in favor of a bill and telling people that constitutionally it can be done. So to that, we may have differing opinions. My second question: right now, you've reported a significant amount of money in donations. Pretty close to hundreds of thousands of dollars. With many of the funds that you're receiving right now from out-of-state PACs, sitting senators and state representatives, most notably a $5,000 contribution for Senator Fuller Clark for a non-political position. Do you believe at some point this may create a conflict of interest if one of those elected officials who donated to your campaign will need to have a recount? And how will you deny the presence of a conflict of interest?
Well, I appreciate the question. Let me just correct one thing. In the grassroots fundraising that we've done, we haven't taken money, for example, from out-of-state PACs, which the caller mentioned. Almost all the money we've raised is from New Hampshire individuals. 100% of it is from individuals. We don't take money from PACs or corporations or special interests like that. One of the things I propose is that our election should be overseen by a nonpartisan director rather than a politician. I think that it's very important, and a number of other states do this, that we have a professional civil servant who is managing elections. There are 7 offices within the Secretary of State's office, 7 different divisions. Many of them are run by a professional civil servant director, as opposed to simply someone who is there because of a political mechanism, like getting elected. I think that would be a great model for our elections division as well, and it would take some of the politics out of this. One of the things I've been discouraged by is that Secretary Gardner has pushed a pretty political agenda from that office. We've seen a number of changes to our election laws in recent years. First voter ID, then SB 3, then 1264.
Are you saying those were pushed by the Secretary of State's office?
Well, I'm not the one saying that. That's what the media says, and he and the Deputy Secretary were the only ones who went to testify in favor of those bills, or in favor of the most recent bill. But also getting New Hampshire involved in some of the national mess. We had this whole Trump voter fraud commission. This is the only state that hosted it in the country.
Yeah, that kind of, I have to say, and I don't think it's any secret, that kind of stuck in my craw a little bit too. I feel like the Bill Gardner, who I respect, and I really am not here to hit him at all in any way, but I feel like that respect, that credibility that he had built up over all those years was I don't know, somehow it was taken advantage of by this committee.
Yeah, I really do make a point of not questioning his motives around it, because I don't know what was motivating his decision making, but I know what the outcomes were, which is that we've seen seas of ink, barrels of ink, of press coverage of this quote-unquote voter fraud situation of people busting over the border, theoretically, to vote here, which isn't true. There is no widespread voter fraud in New Hampshire. But at the same time, a year ago, that office asked the city of Manchester to remove 800 eligible voters from our voter rolls. And they only stopped when the deputy city clerk here found that many of those people, about 38%, had been recent voters here. They did that statewide, asked thousands of people to be removed from the voter rolls. Last week sent out ballots that were wrong to 126 voters. And I'd like to see less of a focus on what has been a legislative political agenda relative to changing these voting laws, or the president's political agenda relative to the Voter Fraud Commission, and more of a focus on getting things right and getting the basics right. And we saw that in the town meeting snow day mess last spring. And I think there's a lot of opportunity in the other parts of that office as well to have more legislative oversight and accountability.
I think clarity of message might be helpful too, because I've found that you mentioned the town hall snow day, and I think the whole press reporting of this voter fraud commission and what records were going to be released and what were asked for. I mean, that was just such a garbled mess.
It was interesting.
It led to a lawsuit that, once it got sorted out, was dropped on day one, because it was, the lawsuit was a result of the poor communication.
Yeah, it was a mess on a lot of levels. The Secretary of State's office we're headed to court against the ACLU to give
That's what
away
I'm
our
talking
voter
about.
lists.
Yeah.
There's actually I don't know if it's a silver lining of the whole thing, but we learned more than, because of the media scrutiny. It turns out that the state and our public archives had been having 51 different voter lists that had private information in the public archives, driver's license numbers, in some cases, individuals who have their address withheld from the voter roll because they're under a protective order, because of a domestic violence situation, that sort of thing. They're legally protected, but their information had been written down and was stored in the state archives in a public way. So some of the silver lining is we got to see a little bit under the hood, and some of it was a little bit messy, but at least there was an opportunity to fix those things and have some change. It was interesting to watch the Secretary of State of Maine, who joined the Voter Fraud Commission, saw what was happening, and actually took it to court and won in order to have all the emails released publicly about their internal deliberations. And it was just, it was clear the whole thing was a sham. And of course, what happened was that it was just disbanded in January with no actual outcome. And I don't think that's what we should have been using state resources on or state time on. And I think there was a lot more that we could have been focusing along the way, like, if you're going to have a mess of a town meeting blizzard day one year, then in that intervening year, it'd be good to take some time to try to prevent that mess from happening again. You can't stop the weather, but you can
develop a policy.
You can develop a policy, clarity, work cooperatively with local officials, communicate it in advance, and sure enough, 2 years in a row we got a blizzard on town meeting day, and there hadn't been that work done in between.
Yeah. Time to take a break.
Time to take a little break. Let's regroup.
We will be right back, folks, with Colin Van Ostern. And again, your calls are welcome at 640-3091. We'll be right back with our second segment. Okay, folks, if you're just joining us, this is the progress report for this Wednesday in mid-October, and we are very pleased to have with us Colin Van Ostern, who is now a candidate in the unique race for Secretary of State, where the electorate consists of 400 representatives and 24 state senators. And so this is a very interesting race to run in New Hampshire, unlike any other. And that means that he will be contesting for the favor of those electors, voters, with our Secretary of State, who's now in his 42nd year of service to the state, and is well honored. And
a lot of institutional
memory there, and it's just very impressive. I mentioned during the break that the Secretary of State called me, and he wanted to let me know that Mr. Farley had...
Okay, scold me in public. I have to accept it. If I made a mistake, I made a mistake.
I don't think it's a big deal, but in any event, just to be clear, he said that when we were talking about the Trump Electoral Integrity Commission, which, as Colin, I think, says quite correctly, was a sham just intended to help support his claim that he would have had the popular vote win if only these fraudulent votes
3
hadn't
million
counted.
fraudulent
3
votes.
million fraudulent
Come on
votes.
now.
And Secretary Gardner elected to serve in that commission and was preparing to send off certain voter information that was supposedly publicly available when the commission was disbanded by a tweet. And Secretary Gardner wanted me to let our people know that, in fact, none of that information was ever sent to
And
Washington.
I believe, I don't recall specifically, but I may have said, and I don't deny it, that that information was handed over to the commission. I was wrong, and I apologize for that, but darn it, the stamp was on the envelope.
Well, yeah, and to be clear, there was a lawsuit underway where the ACLU was suing the Secretary of State to stop them from turning the list over.
Yeah.
And then the commission was disbanded.
Yeah.
Missed it by that much, as Maxwell Smart would say, but I do apologize. I never intend to mislead by any stretch.
Well, we try and be accurate here, and when we're not accurate, we're happy to admit that we weren't, whether it's big or small. The fact is, the Secretary of State has. We hear a lot about elections because that's what we're all involved in. Everybody, I hope, is concerned about our elections for the reasons Colin well stated. It's we do democracy so well here and so often. But the Secretary of State has other important responsibilities, and we've learned about some of them in things like the Meredith
FRM.
FRM mortgage scam, that Ponzi scheme. The Secretary of State had an involvement in that, supervising our securities commissioner at the time, and it has a very important roles in other areas. And I'd just like to ask you to talk a little bit about those other areas and where you think there are needs for changes and improvements.
Yeah. So there are 7 different offices or divisions within the Secretary of State's office. The one that's most commonly discussed and referred to in the media is the Elections Division. But there's also administration.
The corporate division, I think, try to call them and see if you can
Well,
get
if you did,
through.
voicemail would be a good innovation within the office, within the general office. I think they have it in the corporate division, which is nice. But they've, after a lot of pressure from a lot of us, there have been some positive steps in terms of getting some of the processes available online for corporate registration, trade name registration, filing annual reports. We're still way behind where most states are. It's kind of like working with a website of what your bank's website looked like in 1998. It's there and it works. But 4 years ago they announced that there would be a mobile app. It never actually materialized. If you look at many of the administrative functions that are listed on the website, it still says coming soon, and it's been like that for years. The truth is the corporate division's a really important welcome mat for our state businesses. I just had a op-ed in New Hampshire Business Review about this this week, and there are things that we could do, not just getting a new website, though I think we all know probably, if anyone who's been to that website know that that's a little bit overdue. But right now, for example, when you register a business, my wife and I own a laundromat here in downtown Manchester, for example. When you register a new business, you have to set up separate accounts with multiple different state agencies, different ID numbers, one with Employment Security, another with the Department of Revenue, another with the Secretary of State's office. There could be a lot better job of putting out a welcome mat for new businesses, helping them proactively with the things that we can do to help support local businesses, trying to streamline some of those services. And also, if there are businesses that want to do business with the state of New Hampshire as a customer, we have a really paper-heavy, long bureaucratic contracting process that we could be streamlining, make it more modern and efficient, so that local businesses could better compete with some of the big national chains.
Does that go through the Secretary of State's office?
So they manage all the contracting process in conjunction with the agencies and the Attorney General's office. This gets into the weeds, but I'm a former executive counselor, so I get passionate about this stuff. You have to have a certificate of good standing and a proof of your insurance, and you should have to have proof of insurance. That's important when you're doing business with the state. But there are many nonprofits that have many different contracts with the state throughout the year. There's no reason that office couldn't have a repository at the Secretary of State's office to keep that information, so that if you have a small business
instead of project to project, contract to contract, it would.
So let me tell you a story. When I became an executive counselor, a state trooper showed up at my porch before the first council meeting. and had a beautiful suitcase-type tote bag with thousands of pages of state contracts that we would be voting on. And I live in Concord, so it wasn't a big trip for him, but state troopers actually bring those bags out to each of the 5 executive counselors' houses, and that's extraordinarily appreciated. What I asked at the time of the Secretary of State's office who assembled it is, would there be a way to get the contracts online in the exact same format that the counselors looked at them in paper? And it took about 6 months of work to do that. There's some great people in that office who I loved working with and I think do a really good job. And I was able to work with a few of them and became the first counselor ever to start using an iPad or a laptop to review the contracts. What I found was that it wasn't just a little bit easier for, one less trooper to be distracted with that. And we didn't just save some trees. But I started getting calls regularly from constituents, from local officials who had a question about a contract or saw something online. Occasionally a local business that had lost a bid and they were able to look at the winning bid and maybe raise some good questions about how it was put together. You can use technology not just to save money or make people's lives easier. You can also use it to do a more effective job.
Information tech, IT, right? Information
and there
technology.
are so many ways that office and the corporate division and administration could really harness the power of what we expect from, we're all consumers. Any private business that you work with, you have certain expectations. I think that's what we should expect as taxpayers too. And I think some of those functions don't get the same attention they deserve, and they also don't get enough legislative oversight, I think. That office didn't always used to be as big as it is, the Secretary of State's office. There are a number of divisions that used to be part of another agency and got brought over the years. Vital Records used to be part of the Department of Health and Human Services. The Bureau of Securities Regulations used to be at the Insurance Department. And what happened is, in those other departments, you have more legislative oversight, more regular audits of the agencies. They go through rulemaking through that thing called GELCAR that I think only people in Concord pay attention to, but it's really important when you turn a law into a rule. And not have, the Secretary of State's office declines to participate in that rulemaking. They haven't had an audit in more than 11 years now. The last one that there was really bad. And I think that we could have
the audit of the results.
The results of the audit. So there was an audit in 1996.
Oh, geez, you're not going to have another one if it comes out like great.
Well, the explanation was, well, you can't trust that one. It was 11 years ago. Well, then let's have another one now. There was one in 96, and not much positive had changed between then and 2007, when the most recent one was. There were, I think, of the 12 central findings from the 90s, only 3 had been substantially addressed in that decade. And then since then, there were 30 significant deficiencies and material weaknesses, and this is a nonpartisan office. I'd like to think that whether you are a Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Independent legislator, that you want to be a representative of taxpayers who knows where the money's going, that it's being put to good use, that there are independent controls looking out for it, that there are good privacy statutes, that there are clear rules. I mean, these are the sorts of things people expect from good government, and I don't think that's what we've seen recently from the Secretary of State's office, and that's why we have elections, is to have an opportunity for change.
Well, very good.
I want to talk a little bit about the election, because it really is a unique situation where you're running a campaign.
Yeah.
I've run in campaigns before, as is Bob, and our universe seems to be ever expanding. I'm always trying to find one more door to knock on that might be a prospective voter, from my point of view. Your universe actually contracts over
That's
the
true.
course of the campaign.
In a few weeks, it'll be down to 424.
Yeah, so you start out with, before the primaries, with multiple candidates for a particular seat.
Yeah.
And then you get down to the 2 candidates for a particular seat in most cases, some unopposed. But then you're right. In 20 days, you'll be down to the you'll know who your actual universe is.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that you've already begun to make these relationships with these people as they're running, as their candidates. They're not all incumbents.
Sure.
So you have to go out. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about the mechanics, the politics. I know it's not a political office, supposedly, but how do you campaign for it?
I mean, it's the result of an election in the legislature.
Right, but you're not going to the town dump trying to meet new people.
No,
who
when I
you're
go to the
going
town
after.
dump, I'm emptying out a pickup truck.
Exactly.
Yeah, so no one has run for this job since Bill did in 1976. He did so successfully. A couple folks have tried to run against him. Donna Sitek tried to run in 1984, just in the final few weeks before the vote, and didn't do that particularly successfully. But it hasn't been contested very often. So for a lot of us, it's new to even have a race for this. I think it's really important that we do. I think we have to have competition. It raises some of these issues. And so we started very deliberately believing two things. One is you would simply never have enough time between Election Day on November 6th and the day of the vote, which is December 5th. I mean, in between you got Thanksgiving, Veterans Day. If you literally map out the time, you can't have a half-hour-long conversation with 424 people over the course of 4 weeks like that, each. So we knew it would take a little bit more time than that. And I also believe, and I've already seen some of the success of this, that by putting a spotlight on some of the issues that matter, that you can start to build the coalitions for change that I think we'll need. Because I think that it can't be just a question of who's sitting in the Secretary of State's office alone. And I'll give you an example of gerrymandering. I used to represent the most gerrymandered district in the state of New Hampshire on the Executive Council. It bordered on Massachusetts, Maine, and Vermont all at the same time. People call it the Dragon District now. And I watched it get gerrymandering. I watched the gerrymandering happen as I was running for the seat. They took the, college towns, lots of liberal voters of Dover and Durham, took them out of Chris Sununu's district to protect him in that part of the state, just put him in the one next door, which happened to be the one I was running in. Did the same thing with Keene on the other end of the state, and voila, you get this dragon-shaped district. Democrats have done that too in other states when they've been in power. Power corrupts. This is not just a Democrat versus Republican thing at all. And so we laid out a platform when I announced I was going to run for this race to try to build grassroots support for change for the things that really do hurt the integrity of our elections, like gerrymandering. I went to the Libertarian Party convention. We sent folks to the platform committees of all the Democratic Party's platform hearings. And this year is actually the first year in state history 2 of the 3 major parties adopted a platform plank against partisan gerrymandering for the first time ever. So that's the sort of work that we're doing. It surfaces the issues. It gives me an opportunity to talk to voters and legislators and prospective legislators. We've hosted 200 plus legislators around the state in libraries and living rooms and senior centers to talk about civic engagement and voting rights. We've had folks from Democratic, Republican, and Libertarian Party at those. I don't know if that's the right way to run or not. I think that it's the best way that we can. I really believe that we're a state where grassroots change can really bubble up from the people, and that legislators really are the people's voice in our state government, and that by having that conversation, by talking with people about how we can end gerrymandering, how we could ban corporate contributions in our state campaigns, how we can protect voting rights and have good government and good transparency, that if we have that conversation, and we have it over the course of a few months so that legislators and those running can hear about it and think about it, then we'll have a real competitive election in December on Organization Day, and that's what I hope we'll have.
How's the campaign going? How do you feel
I
about
think
the
it's
feedback
going
you're
well.
getting?
I mean, like I said, no one's done this for 42 years, so there's not a lot of comparison points. It's not like when you are running TV ads or something like that, which we're not doing. Polling doesn't matter in a race like this. The way I judge success is, are people noticing these issues? Are they being dealt with seriously? Are we starting to make progress? I think that has been happening slowly on issues like gerrymandering. I was glad that when we did catch the 126 ballots that had gone out to voters incorrectly, and by we, I don't just mean my campaign, though we caught it in 3 of the 5 towns very early on. But by sounding the alarm, we got some scrutiny of that. It's in the public. These candidates never even heard from the Secretary of State's office that they had been left off or mislabeled in the ballot. Even after it had been in the newspaper, they had never heard. So just putting some public scrutiny on it, in that case, new ballots have been sent out to everybody now. So I think those are the sorts of things that show we are making some positive impact. And I think that's healthy.
Wow. So you did need a significant budget to do all this.
Well, I work for a living.
Yeah.
So, we've raised money to help hire a couple grassroots organizers to help us put together forums with 200 legislative candidates around the state, and probably at this point 1,000 plus grassroots volunteers go to all those platform committee meetings. We do a lot of online organizing as well, and it seems to be having an impact.
Wow.
1,000 volunteers for the Secretary of State's race.
It's very
I,
impressive.
Well, there are-
I learn something every time.
There
I come
are
on
a
the
lot
show.
of people
Wow.
in communities all across the state who care about, particularly
Oh,
who
I'm
take
not
pride in
denying
New
that
Hampshire's
people
democracy.
care. I'm just, you know, I have to confess, I'm a little surprised to
Yeah.
hear the extent of this campaign. That's very, very impressive.
It certainly is.
Well, I also figure it's going to be hard. Bill's a very successful politician. He's been there for 42 years. He's got a better track record at winning elections than I think anyone shy of maybe Ray. No, yeah, even more than Ray Burton had when Ray and I served on the executive council together. So I don't take that lightly. You know, I think he knows his way around the state house. Has a lot of longstanding relationships. Has an office of folks there who will kind of advocate on his behalf. And frankly, that takes a real serious effort in order to try to bring change.
And his institutional memory is still just incredible. I mean, you can go up there and you can ask him about the 1968 primary in which he, put the whole program together on that, or any of the primaries since he's been Secretary of State, and he'll remember unbelievable number of details and great little stories too. I mean, that's a.
So when I was on the executive council, I've had some fun conversations with him about the origins of the executive council, which go back to the late 1600s, actually. I really think he has earned and deserves a place in our state's history, and he will always have that no matter who wins this race.
Yeah.
I also know we will have another Secretary of State after this, and another one after that, and another one after that. And we deserve people who take it seriously, who are going to treat the office seriously, who are going to think through policies about what we could do better, like auditing the office or having rulemaking or regular legislative oversight. And it's been a long time since anyone really took it as seriously as Bill Gardner did in 1976. But I think that's what the people in New Hampshire deserve, and that's why we're taking this race seriously.
Okay. Time for our last break.
Time to take a break. I'm exhausted. I need a break, Bob.
It's very interesting.
But folks, don't forget to call in 640-3091. It's a very interesting conversation we're having here, and an office that affects you pretty much every day of your life, whether you realize it or not. So call in if you got any questions or observations. But for now, we'll take a quick break, and we'll be back in a minute.
Okay. Well, folks, we have a little bit of a not totally unexpected, but not actually confirmed change in our plans for tonight. I had previously
Live
spoken,
TV, though. We're gonna roll with this.
I had previously at an event over on the west side spoken with Gray Chenoweth, who won the primary to be the candidate for executive counselor in the district that includes our viewing area. And we checked the dates, and it turned out that this was a date he could be available. And I said, but we do have another guest on, and you just had the pleasure of hearing him. Very impressive, I thought.
And we want to thank him. We
And
didn't
wanna
get to formally
being
thank him before the break.
Very gracious of him to be here and to graciously allow us to welcome our second guest, which we're very pleased to have here, and that is Gray Chenoweth, who narrowly won the primary against Garth Corvo.
It was a solid win, 11%. That's not,
Was it that much? I didn't realize it was that
Yeah,
much.
it was 11%, and I won all 19 towns.
I heard it was close because he ran up a pretty decent margin here in Manchester.
So I won Manchester by 80 votes.
Oh, well, thank you for correcting my knowledge on this.
That was the close one you were thinking of.
I guess
That's-
so.
Yeah.
Okay, well, in any event, you're well and properly nominated to be the candidate. And you got less than 3 weeks to go. How's the campaign going? What are your issues, and what's the next 3 weeks look like, and so forth?
Well, the first thing I'd start off and just say that, as part of that campaign, Garth and I, who is my opponent in the primary, both talked about the fact that we respected each other, we respected the other's positions on things, and that whatever happened, whoever won, that after the primary we'd get together because we both knew that either one of us would be a better alternative than Ted Gatsas, the former Mayor Gatsas, and so I was really incredibly pleased and incredibly appreciative to receive Garth's wholehearted support. He did a great event. Joined the campaign team, has given me a lot of great advice, and to how to reach out to the folks that I didn't get in the primary, and so that's been fantastic, and I really appreciate him doing that, and he's a great public servant, and
Yes,
it's been
he
great
is.
to get that support and very meaningful for me, and I think it's helped a lot, making sure that our Democratic Party is unified, especially as I go on to make sure that just like with Councilor Pappas, that open-minded Republicans and independents come over and vote this way, because I think that's obviously what I believe is the right choice for our state to move forward.
Yeah. So give us a little, I imagine a lot of people know, but maybe some don't, a little bit about you, and because this is your first attempt to seek public office. If you've had a remarkable career without doing that yet, so you tell us a little bit about that and your family. And
Yeah, so I live here in Manchester with my my wife Tara and our two boys, Graham and Lincoln. Graham's almost 8, and Lincoln is almost 4. Graham goes to Webster School, and we love it up there. Great school. And I currently work with Dean Kamen on the Advanced Regenerative Manufacturing Institute, which is trying to bring biotech manufacturing to the mill yards and to New Hampshire, and to really spur the manufacturing of engineered tissues and organs on a national basis. And before that, I was in software. I worked at a company called Silvertech with Nick Sogu, who's a great community leader, as Chief Operating Officer, and I also worked for a long time at Dyne with a guy named Jeremy Hitchcock, who's another great community leader, also as Chief Operating Officer. So, long business career, and before that, I started off as a young attorney at Sheehan, Finney, Bass and Green with some tremendous lawyers and tremendous mentors like Kim and Zachas, Brad Cook, people that really, Sue Manchester, people that shaped my growth as a professional.
yeah, two of my favorite people too. For
Great
sure.
people.
Yeah, yeah.
Gray, I want to jump in because you're talking
Yeah.
about your experience, and it's spectacular.
Yeah.
And before I do this, I want to say 2 things. One, I think that there's definitely a difference between you and your opponent, Ted Gatsas, and that you're the better choice. I want to start with
Well, I
that.
appreciate your support.
The second thing I want to say is I want this question to be an opportunity. Don't take it
Yeah,
the wrong way.
of course, yeah.
But you got on the one side, you got Ted Gatsas, a very wealthy, very successful, very Manchester businessman, white guy. On the Democratic side, we have Gray Chenoweth, a very successful, very wealthy Manchester businessman, white guy. I offer this opportunity to differentiate yourselves. What's the difference between you two?
Well, I think this race is really a choice between new ideas and old politics. What I'm bringing to the table is a fresh set of perspectives that I've gained over my business experience, especially in technology, that I want to bring to the table, and I want to have the state benefit from that. I want to have citizens benefit from getting better services from our state as a result of leveraging technology. So I think there's a difference between former Mayor Gatsas and myself on that point. I think he's been around a lot, and some of the things he's doing are just, political battles, right? And I'm focused on new ideas, and I think that that's one thing that I can do. That every candidate's different, and you're just a product of your experiences. So that's one difference, I think, between new ideas and old politics. I think the other difference between us is that you know, I'm very committed to a woman's right to make her own healthcare decisions. I'm very committed to making sure that we fund Planned Parenthood and ensure that the healthcare services that they deliver are benefit all the the women and men and teenagers.
Which is going to be right on your table as an executive counselor.
Which is going to be right on my table as an executive counselor, and and I think that I'm going to be able to keep an eye on the bottom line and manage towards goals. Right. I think one of the things, I don't like to make excuses. And I think on things like rail, we can't just think it's a good idea. We got to go out and get it done. And that's what I've been trying to do from the private sector, and hopefully I'll have a chance now to do it as part of state government. Because I really do think that whether it's a public or private solution on passenger rail or on commuter rail, it would be transformative for the southern New Hampshire economy. And I think we can't
that's
just...
a definite distinction between the two of you.
Yes.
There's no two ways about that. He's dead set against it.
Yeah, well, I mean, what I understand he's said in the past is that he's for it, but you don't know how to pay for it. And from my perspective, that's just as good as a
You're
no. I
against
think, in fact, it's even worse than maybe a no, because at least if there's a no, then, you've got to convince someone of a different choice. The challenge for me has been, as we've seen on the council, there's people that we rejected $4 million to do the engineering work to determine how much money would cost to build the bridge across the Merrimack, to refurbish it so that we could get the train all the way to Manchester. And how can you, on the one hand, say it's going to be too expensive, and on the other hand, not take money to find out how much it's going to cost? Right? It doesn't make any sense. You don't have to have a long experience in business to know that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of clear distinctions between former Mayor Gatsis and myself. I mean, he has a long record of, I know that he cares passionately about the city, and I think we can all take that for granted. But the question is, who's going to be able to do the job that needs doing in Concord, which is making sure that the state is efficient, effective, and ready to do even more efficiently, and leverage innovation to deliver better services for citizens. And I think that my background and experience puts me in a better position to do that.
What made you think that you could make a better difference as the executive council? Because you've held very significant positions in the high tech businesses here in the city, as you discussed. Why did you think you needed to be in public office to continue to make a difference?
Well, so I've been involved in community service for a really long time. Ever since I was involved when my dad was very involved. He's the founder of New Hampshire Public Radio and on the school board in Shaker Regional and served as a state rep. And it's just in my blood to serve, to be community minded. I think that's the way that New Hampshire works, is it works when people volunteer. And so when I moved back to Manchester, I got involved in a lot of different things. Helped found Manchester Young Professionals Network, helped found Stay Work Play, served on the board of Families in Transition, served on the board of the advisory board of the Courier, served on the advisory or on the board of directors for City Years. So I've done a lot of different things, and I've always felt as though what experiences do I have to be able to change and have a positive impact on the community? So how can I uniquely serve the community? And it's funny. So actually, January, I held an event at my house for Chris Pappas, because I'm a big supporter of his. And we did the event, and they said, Gray, so I'm running for Congress, and no one's announced for my seat. You should really think about running, because it really is a job where a person with business experience can make a difference, right? Because you understand the contracts, you understand the what it's like to hire people, what to look for when you're hiring executives, which is the other thing that the executive council does. And I said, boy, you know what? You're dead on. That really is a place where business experience could have an impact. And I said, you know what? If I feel like I could do a better job and do that job, given my experience, and serve the people, serve citizens in that way, then that's something I should really take seriously. So, that was really what drove it. And, and it's been a lot of fun since then. And I think that, my vision for what the executive council can do is different than Ted's, right? Different than Mayor Gatsis's. I believe that not only is it a place to ensure that we get good value for our dollars, but it is like the board of directors for the state. You are collaborating with all the people that are running the commissions, and you're not telling them what to do. There's a very big difference between being an executive and being a board member, but you're collaborating, you're asking questions, and being in an open dialogue about how to get the state further faster. And I think that my experience in technology really could, help move the ball, because, our state doesn't move as fast as it could on technology. One of the things we talked about before was, why can't you make an appointment online at the DMV, right?
Well, I mean, we don't even have technology in some pockets of our North Country, right? I mean, we've
We
gotta
don't have the
expand that.
infrastructure that's up there, and it's absolutely essential. When you think about, a modern day utility, it's difficult to get business done without the internet, right? And I think we need
surely
to make
is.
sure that we do all we can to enable access and make sure that everyone's on a good playing field. And I think to do that, you've got to have someone that understands those issues, understands technology, understands innovation, on the executive council to help the state commissioners and the governor as they work through those issues to try and do more for citizens.
And in the meantime, you'll continue with your regular job at the Army, right, I assume?
Hey, Dean said I could have nights and weekends off, so he's a generous man, and I appreciate that, and I'm incredibly committed to that
Yeah.
role and to that organization because it really is an unbelievable opportunity for our state. I was so
I believe
pleased.
that, too.
I was so pleased that the state government supported the loan forgiveness
Can
and
we steer
the
it
tax
a little
holiday.
bit? Could you please talk about, because this is something that has been, I've been on fire about since I first read the first headline that this was coming our way. Can you talk about what the future of Manchester could possibly be in like 30 seconds with
Yeah.
this? We're just running out of time.
Yes. So what I would say is that the exciting part about this opportunity is that just like we've seen Dyn grow and bring other IT technology companies, we've seen the great jobs that come along with that. Well, it's an echo of Boston. And Boston is a distant cousin from San Francisco when it comes to the success, vibrance of its IT industry. However, number one in the world for biotech is Boston. So if we can plant that flag of biotech using Army as a catalyst here in Manchester, the positive impact is really just immense and incredibly exciting. And
Especially
working
when
on
well
some of those
answered
people
so
come
quickly.
here
I
by
really
commuter
appreciate
rail.
that.
Exactly. Well, if we do that, not only will more companies will locate here, more people will find Manchester and southern New Hampshire home, and it really will benefit, just tremendously the economy.
I wish we had more time, Gray. We wish we could. We checked your schedule, and this was the best we could do. So
Well, thank you for having me on.
I certainly am glad you were
Glad to have
on.
you. Thanks
It
for
was
coming
terrific. I have just one quick announcement I was asked to make. There will be a meet and greet for West Side Democratic candidates Thursday, October 25th, 6 to 7:30 p.m. at Fricker's Neighborhood Grill on Dubuque Street. So come up there, refreshments, cash bar, meet the vigorous candidates for the west side of Manchester. And that's October 25th at Fricker's. I've never been to Fricker's.
I have not either.
In any event, I want to thank both Colin Van Ostern for being so gracious about sharing this hour with Gray, and I want to thank Gray for coming in and giving us a far too brief an example of what he has to offer to the state as an executive counselor, and of course he offers an awful lot to the city in many ways, as he's told you. Really great candidates we have, folks, and less than 3 weeks to vote, and please do that. Please get out there and vote. It's so important. Thanks, everybody.
See you next week, folks.
Thank you.